You're listening to the weekly Parsha Podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat B'Shemesh Israel, 5780, 2020. This week in Chutz La'aretz, you'll be reading Parshas Behaaloscha, and if you are in Eretz Yisrael, you'll be reading Parsha-Shlach. And as I did last week, I'd like to continue with a connection between the two parshas, so we can enjoy something that can work at any Shabbos table. At the end of Parshas Behaaloscha, the Torah describes the conversation that Miriam Hanaviyah has with Aharon HaKohen. They're speaking about Moshe Rabbeinu, and they, as Nevi'im, as prophets themselves, they knew that a prophet has to be married. They have to be normal people, even if they're on a very high level. Yes, it's true that they need to sometimes abstain, perhaps, from being with their spouse. But they knew that Moshe Rabbeinu, not only was he abstaining from being with his wife, he had divorced her. And so Miriam Hanaviyah turns to her brother Aharon and says, what is Moshe doing? Why has he divorced his wife? To which HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he sees what they've done, that they're speaking negatively about Moshe Rabbeinu, they spoke Lason Hara, Hashem causes Miriam to become a Mitzaira. She becomes leprous, she has leprosy. And indeed, the Jewish people wait for her for 7 days in a place called Chatzeros. They wait there for her until she is cured from her leprosy. And indeed, the Jewish people learn the lesson, what happens to somebody who speaks Lason Hara, who speaks negatively of others. Even though Miriam was speaking something which she felt was appropriate, she's the older sister of Moshe Rabbeinu. She felt that she knew better. She felt she knew how things should be. And she was saying it for a constructive reason. Nevertheless, she spoke negatively, and therefore she received this great punishment of tzeras. The Jewish people experienced that 7 days. They waited for her, and then they moved on until they got to the next location. And what happens when they're in Midbar Paran, which was the next location? So they sent out the spies. That's the beginning of Parsha Shlach. These two stories are juxtaposed. Number one, because indeed, as the Maharzo explains, they happened one after the other concurrently. And indeed, not just that, but there was something in the spies that the mistake that they made was one that they should have learned not to make that mistake from Miriam. And before I continue, I just want to preface what I'm saying, that it may be that many of the things that we're going to speak about this week, last week, the next few weeks, these connections between the parshas, you may have heard the idea before, but I hope to add a new dimension. It's easy at the beginning of a parsha to talk about the first thing that they talk about in the parsha, which is often a connection between this week and last week's parsha. But in Mitzvah Hashem, I hope to bring a new dimension to something you may have learned before. So just that preface is important. Okay, so in the beginning of Parsha Shlach, these great men, they were tzaddikim. The 12 representatives of each of the tribes of the Jewish people were sent out to check out the land of Israel. Indeed, it was done with Hashem's haskama. God agreed to this. Moshe Rabbeinu agreed to this. The people were chosen because of their greatness, but they came back on Tisha B'Av 40 days later, and they spoke negatively of the land of Israel. Now it's important, I want to mention that this story occurred exactly now, this time on the calendar. Today is Sivan, and Sivan, according to, this is my understanding of the Maharzo. Maharzo mentions that it was 7 days from when Miriam spoke Lason Hara until the tzaras went away. Then they traveled on to the Midbar Paran, and the Meraglim were sent out there a few days later. Depending on how long, I'm not sure exactly how long it took to get to Midbar Paran. We're talking about 1.5 million people traveling, but I think it's safe to say it was a few days. And the Meraglim left on Chav Tes of the month of Sivan, which is the month we're in now, because it was 40 days. When they came back, it was Tisha B'Av. And so, if we make the calculation, we'll see that the beginning of the story, with Miriam speaking negatively of her brother, was actually, it seems, approximately Chav Sivan. It's exactly the day today. And they're sent out, and 40 days after they're sent out, they return. Okay? Important, something interesting to note. I hope to come back to that as we continue. But the story happened in Ar Tkufa, from Chav Sivan until Tisha B'Av, that's the story. The end of Parshas Behaaloscha is approximately Chav Sivan, and the story of the spies is from Chav Tes Sivan all the way through Tisha B'Av. Okay, so that's the Tkufa, the time that we're entering into now. And it's important to note, and perhaps, like I said, I hope to expand on this, but it's important to note that just like from Pesach until Shavuos, you have 50 days, 7 weeks. From Chav Sivan until Tisha B'Av is also 7 weeks. Okay? We'll come back to that point, I hope. Now let's see. So what happens in the beginning of Parsha Shlach? The spies, they do not heed, they do not recognize. We'll see, I'd like to read the message inside, but they don't recognize the lesson, the impactful lesson. There was a shock. The Jewish people waited for the greatest tzaddikus, the greatest righteous woman of the generation, Miriam Miriam the prophetess, sister of Moshe Rabbeinu, who prayed on his behalf, who took care of him, made sure as a baby that he would be saved, who convinced her father that he should remarry her mother so that the children would be born. Moshe was born because of that. Miriam she sang, she led the Jewish people in song after the splitting of the sea, the women. And the shock, she received such a punishment of tsaras. The entire Jewish people, 1.5 million people, waited for her a week. They didn't get the message. And they went on and they spoke lashon hara. That's the problem. And that's the Medrash points out this connection. So I'd like to read that inside, and I'd like to try to understand it in a deeper way, exactly what is the idea, and how is it connected also to us and to the tkufa that we are entering into now, from Chav Sivan until Tisha B'Av. Here we go. Davar acher, shlach lecha anashim yasuru. So the pasuk says, this is in Perktas Zayin of the Medrash in section 6. Shlach lecha anashim yasuru. I want you to send out these people, and I want them to check out the land of Israel. Medrash brings the pasuk that Daber Miriam va'Aharon b'Moshe. Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moshe. So interesting. There's a discussion in the Gemara in Shabbos about the fact that Aaron, Rabbi Kiva says that Aaron also received leprosy. Not just Miriam. They both became leprous because of speaking about Moshe. Achar kach shlach lecha. And immediately after the story of Aaron and Miriam speaking lashon hara about Moshe, they're told to send out the spies. The verse says in Isaiah chapter 44, verse 18, they do not know, they do not understand that they have been covered over. They have covered over that which their eyes see. Okay, it's a pasuk in Yeshaya speaking of those who sin. What is the idea of this pasuk? It's as follows. Why do we have the story? The Torah sometimes speaks chronologically, but other times it doesn't. So yes, it's true that chronologically this is the next story, but why does the Torah place these two stories next to each other? There's a reason. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that they were going to speak negatively of the land of Israel, that they were going to bring back a bad report about the land of Israel. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want them to say, I don't want them to claim that they didn't know what the punishment is for lashon hara. How serious it is, how essential it is not to speak lashon hara. Hashem placed these two ideas next to each other, so we should know that the spies were not missing any forewarning about what they were about to do. The mistake that they made had already been made, and they didn't learn from the mistake. Miriam spoke negatively, amazing thing, and she received tzaras. Why did that story happen? And why did that story happen at this point in time, right before? The answer is, says the Medrash, because they needed to learn from this. In other words, we could even ask, it doesn't even, lo matim la. It's not appropriate. It doesn't seem like it's something that fits in with the character of a Miriam Anaviyah, the greatest of all the prophetesses that ever lived. Moshe Rabbeinu's sister. It doesn't fit in. It doesn't seem matim la, that she should speak negatively. I'm adding a little bit of a hesber into the medrash and saying that perhaps the reason that it happened, the very reason that she was nichshal, that she made this mistake, was so that the Jewish people could learn a lesson. And so that they would be forewarned not to make this mistake, that the spies shouldn't make this mistake, and the Jewish people, in accepting or hearing the false statements of the spies, they shouldn't give in and listen to it either. It was an opportunity for them to learn. Okay, if they would think this is Lason Hara, they should just take a look at what just happened to Miriam. It's not a coincidence. Nevertheless, they did not want to learn. That's why the verse says, they did not know, they didn't understand. They covered up their eyes. They didn't want to look. They didn't want to see. They closed their eyes to the reality. And that was the root of their mistake. And that was the root of the mistake of Klal Yisrael. And the result was destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Tisha B'Av, a time of crying for all generations. If we don't learn the key lessons that are right in front of us, if we don't see what's right in front of us, if we don't see what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to us, every single moment there's a message. Every single moment, something is going on in front of us that we need to learn from. We need to understand, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying to me? The Meraglim didn't see. They didn't understand. If a Miriam could make such a mistake, if a Miriam Anaviyah, the greatest of all the prophetesses, the greatest woman of her generation, the Tzadikah Hador, the leader of Am Yisrael, she could make such a mistake, they were not on her level. They could also make such a mistake. And they needed to learn this, and they didn't. They failed. And as a result, Am Yisrael remained in the desert for 40 years. Am Yisrael would not have Moshe Rabbeinu to lead them into Eretz Yisrael, and the Beis Hamikdash, the first Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed. The Inquisition would occur on the 9th of Av. So many tragedies throughout history would occur because that lesson was not learned from Miriam HaNeviah, the mistake that she made, which was to teach us. So we shouldn't make that mistake, was not learned, was not recognized. And I want to teach you something very deep. I want to teach you something that's so awesome, and it's connected to what we said before. I mentioned that from Chaf Sivan, which it seems, it's safe to say, I'm conjecturing, but it's safe to say that that's when Miriam made the mistake. From Chaf Sivan until Tisha B'Av, it's a series of 50 days. 49, 50 days. 7 weeks. What is the idea of a series of 7 weeks? The idea is as follows. We see from Pesach until Shavuos. From Pesach until Shavuos is also 7 weeks, 50 days. What is the concept? Pesach was when Klal Yisrael was redeemed from Egypt. We ceased to be slaves to Paro, and we became slaves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We became God's people. We were redeemed. But what was the purpose of the redemption? It wasn't just that we should be free. It was so that we should receive the Torah on Har Sinai. Meaning, the culmination, the climax of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt, was on Shavuos. Shavuos was the entire purpose of the receiving of the Torah, was the entire purpose of the Exodus. So the completion of Pesach was on Shavuos. There was a developing 7 times 7. When you have 7 weeks, 7 times 7, there's a developing that's occurring, growing until it reaches the climax, the thing that was conceived, let us say, on the first day, the day of Pesach, is completed and born, so to speak, on the 50th day. And that's what we have also from Chaf Sivan until Tisha B'Av. From Chaf Sivan, interestingly, if you look in your siddur, you will find that in some siddurim, that there are special slichas that are to be said on Chaf Sivan. Chaf Sivan was the day in history that was used as a commemoration of the tremendous massacres that occurred in the years Tach and Tat. And there was a tremendous amount of Jewish people that were murdered, and as the Crusaders came through Europe. And that was the day that was chosen as the day of commemoration of that terrible time. And what is interesting about Chaf Sivan is that it's the day when the fruits begin to be completed. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that this is correct. the fruits begin to be completed. And the idea is that we start to see something that's coming to a completion. There's a development. And I'm saying that there's something that's going to develop from Chav Sivan until Tisha B'Av. Okay? What is it that develops here? So you see that in this context, it's important to understand that what Miriam did was a small mistake. It was a small mistake on her part. But just like we spoke about last week with the Nesiim have to be people who represent to Am Yisrael the greatest possible thing. They raise Am Yisrael. They are the examples for Am Yisrael. And we need to follow after our leaders. They raise up that flag for us to see who we should be. So the same thing is also true in the opposite sense. If we see a Miriam and Avia making a mistake, it means that there's something, a mistake that could be bound to happen to us. If our leader has something that's going on that is negative, it could be that that leader has that chisaron because we have that chisaron. It could also be, as we said earlier, that the leader, Hashem places that mistake into the leader so that, not because they actually have that problem, but because Am Yisrael has that problem, or that problem is bound to occur. So we could say that the mistake that Miriam made on Chav Sivan, of speaking negatively, and Aaron heard it, and he therefore also had saras. That mistake was the seed, was the beginning on Chav Sivan of that which would develop over the next 7 weeks. By Tisha B'Av, you would see the results of that seed. Just like from Pesach to Shavuos, you saw the Exodus resulted in the receiving of the Torah, so too this small mistake of a Miriam, it grew and it grew and it grew until the spies made their mistake. They didn't learn from that which was in front of them. And Am Yisrael didn't realize the message, or they didn't take it to heart enough. Not to speak negatively, not to speak falsely, not to believe a false report. And we think about it. If we think about it, what was the problem? What is the idea of Lason Hara? What is the mistake that Miriam made? What is the mistake that the Meraglim made? Miriam's mistake was a different mistake. Miriam was truly concerned about Moshe and what was right. Indeed, she was saying something because it was a constructive criticism. But still, Miriam and Aharon didn't understand Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what Hashem says to them. You don't understand. Moshe Rabbeinu was a different level. He was on a much higher level. Moshe could receive nevuah spontaneously at any moment. A Navi couldn't receive spontaneously nevuah. There was only at certain times. Moshe could receive it at any time, and therefore he had to remain pure, and he couldn't be with his wife. He couldn't be married anymore. They didn't understand that. That's the crux, the root of the mistake of Lashon Hara is, I don't know that other person. I don't know that person. I don't know what challenges they're going through. I don't know exactly what's going on in that person's life. I remember one time I had an interaction with somebody, very negative interaction. The person yelled at me, whatever the story was, whatever the situation was. And a while later, I had another interaction with him where I came back to him and I said, I apologize for judging him. And he said to me that, he was going through a very difficult time in his life when that whole situation occurred. And once I heard that, I felt complete compassion for him. We don't understand another person. We don't know what's going on in their life. Someone lashes out at us. We don't really know what that person is going through or what they've gone through throughout their life that's led them to this point. And so the message of the end of Parshas Behaaloscha and the beginning of Parsha Shlach is, don't judge that person. You don't know. Miriam and Aharon didn't know that Moshe, they didn't understand the level that he was on. And the spies as well. What was their mistake? Their mistake was, they really saw they made a mistake. It was because of their bias, their fear if they would come into Eretz Yisrael, they would lose their great positions. But B'chol Mikra, they saw what they saw. They saw that Eretz Yisrael was a place of incredible danger. Giants, people who were, in a natural way, wasn't a place that was easy to conquer. Yet, the mistake was that they didn't have a place. They spoke not in their place. They didn't have a right to say that Am Yisrael wouldn't get help from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't know what he was doing, bringing Am Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took care of us. He's going to continue to take care of us. They spoke in an inappropriate place. If they would have just said the facts without giving any advice, without stating their own personal conclusions, it would have been fine. It's a land with awesome fruits, very tall inhabitants. It's a great challenge. Stop. If they would have stopped there, not spoken out of place, not spoken out of turn, not spoken about something that they didn't know anything about. They couldn't see the higher reality, which was, what does it mean when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us? Just like Miriam and Aharon couldn't see the high reality. What is Moshe Rabbeinu, a prophet who's on a higher level, who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with him? That's the essence of Lason Hara, is when we don't understand who that person is that we're speaking about. We don't get it. We don't know what's really going on. We don't really appreciate the challenges that the person might be having, the difficulties that might be in their lives, the situation that surrounds what went on. We just don't know. And that's the mistake that Miriam made, which resulted in the mistake of the spies, because they didn't learn the lesson. And it resulted in the sin of Am Yisrael believing the lashon hara of the spies, which has its effect until today. Through Tisha B'Av, we still mourn. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. We don't have a place to truly connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because of that little disconnect from the reality, not being willing to understand, perhaps, that there could be a higher reality, that there could be a Moshe Rabbeinu who's on a higher level, who's more connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that that Am Yisrael could be on a higher level. We're so connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it doesn't matter all the dangers. Not having that understanding created a disconnect from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that resulted in a destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, where we stand today, still disconnected. Still, even though we're back in Eretz Yisrael, we've returned, we have Yerushalayim, amazing miracles, but still we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. Still we don't have the open revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that He's promised us. And so we need to understand, as we watch things develop in the world, as we watch things develop in our lives, that there are seeds that are planted from one moment that are revealed in a later time. There are seeds that are planted in time, whether it's coming from Pesach to Shavuos, and watching the things that have gone on in the world. We watched as this amazing plague took hold and created devastation, whether it was physical devastation or economic devastation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things, and we watch as these things develop. And whether we're talking about what's going on in the current events, the things that go on, we need to understand that there's a development. There are seeds that are planted and they develop, and we watch them unfold. And there's an unfolding in time. And it's true from Pesach to Shavuos, it's true from Chav Sivan to Tisha B'Av. There are other points in the calendar that are connected, whether it's from Rosh Hashanah through the end of Sukkot, which is a 21-day period, or whether it's from each of the days of Sukkot until Hanukkah. Each of those days there's a 70-day period. But all these points in time are connected. And the point here is that we can watch in our lives. We can choose to learn the lessons from those who made mistakes and not repeat those mistakes. And we can also choose to grow, to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like Pesach was a time where we left Mitzrayim, we had an exodus, and we grew and we grew and we grew, and it developed, and the seed that was planted, we saw the result, which was the receiving of the Torah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us. I want to bless you and I ask you to bless me. Hashem should help us, that we should be able to use this time. It was a time the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of lashon hara, because of negativity. Hashem should help us to use this time to learn the lesson from Miriam, to learn the lesson of the spies, the great havoc that results from speaking negatively. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us during this time to raise the level of love. There's so much separation in the world. There's so much physical separation between us, and also the hearts are separated. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us to come closer to each other, closer together, despite the physical distance that we might have. Hashem should help us to come closer. Hashem should help us to speak lashon tov, not to speak lashon hara. Hashem should help us that we should be zeiche to see the seed which He planted, as tzemach David avdecha meheras hatzmiach, the seed which He planted, which has been growing and growing over the last 3,000 years. We should be zeicha to see that seed develop into a beautiful tzemach, a beautiful plant, with the coming of Mashiach. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.